Oops, looks like we didn't plan a seat for you, my daughter-in-law said with a quick laugh, the kind that sounded light but landed heavy in the quiet moment that followed. For a second, I simply stood there, holding the small blue gift bag in my hands, staring at the long folding table in my grandson's backyard. There were balloons tied to the chairs, paper plates decorated with cartoon dinosaurs, and 7 neatly arranged seats for family members. 7 chairs. 7 names written on little cards. And not one of them said Margaret. My grandson Lucas was turning 7 that afternoon, and the whole yard looked like something out of a magazine. Bright banners fluttered between the trees, a bounce house hummed softly on the grass, and the smell of grilled hamburgers drifted through the warm June air. Children ran across the lawn with plastic cups of lemonade, laughing loudly as if nothing in the world could ever go wrong at a birthday party. I forced a small smile and shifted the gift bag in my hands. Inside was a model train set Lucas had been talking about for months. I'd driven nearly 40 miles that morning to the only hobby shop that still carried the brand he liked. I imagined his eyes lighting up when he opened it. "Oh well," I said gently, my voice steady enough that no one could hear the small crack in it. "I'm sure there's a chair somewhere." Emily waved a hand dismissively while adjusting the candles on the cake. "Maybe later," she said. People are still moving around. But no one moved. Not Daniel, my son, who suddenly seemed very interested in checking his phone. Not the cousins who were already sitting comfortably at the table. Not even the empty space beside Lucas that could easily have held another chair. For a moment the sunlight felt a little too bright, and the cheerful music playing from a speaker near the porch sounded strangely distant. I had been to dozens of Lucas's birthday parties before. I had helped plan most of them. When he was younger, the decorations were stored in my garage. The cake recipes came from my kitchen. I used to arrive early to help tie balloons and set up the tables. Today I had arrived right on time, thinking it might be nice for Emily to host things her own way. Apparently she had. I looked again at the table. 7 chairs. Lucas sat in the center wearing a cardboard birthday crown, his small sneakers swinging above the grass as he waited for the cake. He looked happy, unaware of the quiet little gap that had been left where his grandmother should have been. Emily leaned toward another parent and whispered something that made them both laugh softly. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to tell me that the missing chair wasn't an accident. I felt the truth settle quietly in my chest, calm and heavy at the same time. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed the front of my light blue cardigan, and placed the gift bag carefully on the corner of the table near Lucas. Then I looked at Emily and gave her the same polite smile I had practiced for years. "That's all right," I said softly. "I won't need a seat here anymore." For a few seconds after I said those words no one responded, and the cheerful music playing from the small speaker near the porch seemed louder than before. I kept the same polite smile on my face, the one I had learned to use over many years of family gatherings, while Lucas looked up at me with curious eyes that were still bright with birthday excitement. He had no idea anything unusual had happened, and I was grateful for that. I reached down and gently placed my hand on his shoulder. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said softly. "I hope you enjoy the present." His face lit up immediately the way only a 7-year-old can react to the promise of a new toy. "Thanks, Grandma," he said, his sneakers tapping against the metal legs of the chair as he leaned forward to peek at the gift bag. Emily quickly stepped in front of the table and clapped her hands together as if directing a small show. "All right, everyone. Cake time," she announced brightly. The other guests gathered closer around the table, and someone started singing the birthday song. I stepped back so the children could crowd around Lucas. The moment had shifted smoothly away from me, almost as if the missing chair had never existed at all. From where I stood near the lemonade table, I watched the candles flicker in the warm breeze. The sun hung low above the maple trees at the edge of the yard, and the golden light made the balloons glow softly. It should have been a beautiful moment. For a long time, birthday parties had been some of my favorite family memories. When Daniel was a boy, we used to celebrate in our small backyard with homemade cakes and paper streamers taped to the fence. Back then the tables were never perfect and the decorations were simple, but everyone always had a seat. I folded my hands together and reminded myself to breathe slowly. Across the yard, Daniel still had not looked at me. He stood beside the grill talking to one of his neighbors about sports, nodding occasionally, but never once turning his head toward the table. I wondered if he had noticed the missing chair earlier, or if he had only realized it when I did. Either way, he had chosen silence, and that silence spoke more clearly than any words. The song ended with cheerful applause, and Lucas leaned forward to blow out the candles in one big breath. Everyone cheered. Emily laughed loudly and began slicing the cake while handing out paper plates. Children ran across the lawn again, chasing each other between the bounce house and the gift table. Life moved forward quickly, the way it always does during celebrations. A few minutes later, a neighbor named Carol walked over and handed me a cup of lemonade. Her voice was quiet when she spoke. "That was not very nice back there," she said gently. "I saw what happened with the chairs." I gave a small shrug and took a sip of the lemonade. It tasted sweet and slightly too warm from sitting in the sun. "These things happen at busy parties," I replied calmly. Carol hesitated for a moment before glancing toward the table where Emily was laughing with two other parents. "Well, earlier today she told people she was not sure you were coming," Carol said quietly. "She said the table was already full." I looked across the yard again at the neat row of 7 chairs around Lucas. The wind moved the birthday banner slightly, making the bright letters ripple in the afternoon light. At that moment, the truth settled in my mind with surprising clarity. The missing chair had not been forgotten. It had simply never been planned. I remained by the lemonade table for a few minutes after. Carol walked away, watching the party continue as if nothing unusual had happened. Children laughed while chasing each other across the lawn, and the inflatable bounce house squeaked every time someone landed inside it. Emily moved around the table with the confidence of someone hosting the perfect celebration, handing out slices of cake and reminding parents to take pictures before the frosting melted in the afternoon sun. From a distance, everything looked cheerful and welcoming, the kind of family moment people like to post on social media. But standing there with the warm paper cup in my hands, I could see the small details that others might miss. The careful way the chairs had been arranged. The place cards written neatly in black marker. The space between Lucas and his cousin Tyler that could easily have held one more seat if anyone had wanted it there. I took another slow sip of lemonade and felt an unexpected calm settle over me. It was the same calm that comes when a puzzle finally makes sense after you have been turning the pieces around for years. For a long time, I had believed that the distance growing between me and my son was simply part of life. Children grow up. They build their own families. Schedules get busy. That was what I told myself each time a holiday invitation arrived late or a family dinner was suddenly moved to another day. But as I stood there watching the birthday candles melt into the cake, memories began lining up in my mind one after another. There was the Christmas 3 years ago when Emily called the night before to say they were keeping dinner small that year, only to discover later through photos that more than 20 people had attended. There was Lucas' first school play when Daniel told me the wrong time and I arrived just as parents were leaving the auditorium. And there was the weekend trip to the lake last summer that I learned about only after the pictures appeared online with smiling captions about family time. Each moment had seemed small on its own, easy to dismiss, easy to forgive. But together they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore now. I looked across the yard at Daniel again. He had finally wandered closer to the table and was helping Lucas open presents. For a brief moment our eyes met. He gave me a quick nod and then looked away again almost immediately. That small gesture said more than a long conversation ever could. It told me he had noticed the missing chair. It told me he understood exactly what had happened. And it told me he had decided not to change it. I felt a quiet ache in my chest, not sharp or dramatic, just steady and heavy like a weight that had been there for a long time without my realizing it. Lucas pulled the train set from the gift bag, and his face lit up with excitement. "Grandma, look," he said happily, holding the box high so everyone could see the picture on the front. For a moment his joy filled the space between us and softened the tight feeling in my chest. I waved and smiled back at him, grateful that at least one part of the afternoon had gone exactly the way I had hoped. But as the celebration continued and people returned to their conversations, I understood something important with a clarity I had never felt before. The missing chair had not been the beginning of the problem. It was simply the first time I had allowed myself to see it clearly. The afternoon sunlight slowly shifted across the yard as the party continued, and I remained standing near the edge of the lawn where the shade from the maple tree offered a little relief from the warmth of the day. From there I could see almost everything. Lucas sat at the table surrounded by colorful wrapping paper while Daniel helped him open each gift. Emily moved from group to group, speaking with parents and laughing easily, her voice bright and confident as she described the decorations and the games she had planned for the children. To anyone walking past the house, it would have looked like a perfect celebration. Yet the longer I watched, the more memories began returning to me, not all at once, but quietly, like old photographs being placed one by one onto a table. I remembered the first time Daniel brought Emily to meet me many years ago. She had arrived with a wide smile and a small bouquet of grocery store flowers, speaking warmly and calling me Mrs. Collins until I insisted she use my first name. At the time, I had believed her kindness was genuine. She complimented my cooking, asked about Daniel's childhood stories, and thanked me for raising such a thoughtful son. I had welcomed her into the family without hesitation. Over the years that followed, I tried to be the kind of mother-in-law who made life easier instead of harder. When Daniel and Emily struggled with their first apartment rent, I quietly covered 2 months of payments without expecting anything in return. When Lucas was born, I spent long afternoons helping with laundry, cooking meals, and rocking the baby so Emily could rest. Those early days felt full of warmth and cooperation. I truly believed we were building a strong family together. But looking back now, standing in that quiet corner of the yard, I began to notice how slowly things had changed after that. Invitations that once arrived weeks in advance started coming later and later. Conversations with Daniel became shorter, often ending quickly because he was busy with work or errands. Emily began organizing holidays in ways that seemed practical at first, but gradually left less room for me. There was always a polite explanation. The guest list was limited. The schedule had shifted. The event had become smaller this year. Each reason sounded reasonable when I heard it, and I never wanted to cause tension by questioning her decisions. For a long time, I convinced myself that families simply evolve over time, and that my role was changing naturally as Lucas grew older and his parents became more independent. Yet the missing chair at the table had revealed something that none of those earlier moments had made clear. It showed that the change had not been accidental or temporary. It had been carefully arranged, step by step, until the space I once held in this family had quietly disappeared. I watched Lucas lift the train set box again and run toward the bounce house, excited to show it to his friends. His laughter carried across the yard, light and carefree. That sound reminded me why I had ignored so many uncomfortable moments before. My love for my grandson had always been stronger than my pride. I wanted to be present in his life, even if that meant accepting small disappointments along the way. But now, as the afternoon continued and the 7 chairs remained around the table exactly as they had been arranged from the beginning, I realized something else as well. Love may encourage patience, but it should never require someone to pretend they do not see what is clearly happening in front of them. The party slowly began to settle into a comfortable rhythm as the afternoon stretched on. Children moved from the bounce house to the small folding table where Emily had placed bowls of candy and bags of chips, while the adults gathered in small groups near the patio, talking about work schedules, school events, and summer vacation plans. I remained where I was for a while longer, watching quietly, letting the calm feeling that had settled inside me grow steadier with every passing minute. It was not anger that I felt. Strangely, it was clarity. When something confusing finally becomes clear, the mind grows very quiet. That was how the moment felt. A few minutes later, Lucas ran back toward the table holding the box from the train set. "Grandma, can we build it together next weekend?" he asked with bright excitement. "Of course we can, sweetheart," I replied with a gentle smile. "We will build the whole track together." His happiness was sincere and uncomplicated, and I held on to that moment carefully. Children understand love in a simple way that adults sometimes forget. He gave me a quick hug before running back toward the bounce house where the other children were already climbing inside. I watched him disappear into the colorful inflatable walls and then slowly turned my attention back to the adults gathered near the table. Emily was speaking with 2 neighbors again, describing how much planning had gone into the party decorations. Her voice carried easily across the yard. I could hear her explaining how she had organized every detail during the week. Daniel stood beside her, nodding politely, though he still had not approached me once since the cake had been served. I realized then that I had spent many years waiting for moments like this to correct themselves, waiting for invitations to arrive earlier, waiting for conversations to become warmer again, waiting for my son to notice that the space between us was growing wider. But waiting had not changed anything. The only thing that had changed was how quietly I had stepped aside each time another small decision was made without me. I looked again at the table where the 7 chairs remained exactly as they had been arranged hours earlier. Some were empty now while people walked around the yard, yet the empty space where an 8th chair could have stood still felt strangely obvious to me. It was a small detail, but sometimes the smallest details reveal the truth most clearly. Carol passed by again carrying a plate with a slice of cake and paused beside me. "Are you heading out soon?" she asked kindly. "I think I will," I said calmly. "It has been a lovely party." That answer was not entirely untrue. Lucas had enjoyed his birthday, and that mattered more to me than anything else. But as I reached for my purse and keys, I also understood something that had been forming quietly in my mind since the moment I noticed the missing chair. For years I had tried to remain present in this family by adjusting myself to every change that happened around me. I had believed that patience and kindness would always be enough to maintain my place. Yet standing there at the edge of the yard, I realized that patience without boundaries slowly turns into invisibility. And once a person becomes invisible to the people around them, it becomes very easy for others to pretend that empty spaces were always meant to stay empty. The gravel on the driveway crunched softly beneath my shoes as I walked toward my car, the distant laughter from the backyard fading with every step I took. The warm air still carried the faint smell of birthday cake and grilled hamburgers, and for a moment I paused beside the driver's door and looked back toward the house. From that distance, the party looked peaceful and bright. Balloons floated above the fence line, and the sound of children playing echoed across the neighborhood. Anyone passing by would have assumed it had been a perfect afternoon. I opened the car door slowly and sat inside, placing my purse carefully on the passenger seat before closing the door behind me. The quiet inside the car felt almost comforting after the constant noise of the party. For several seconds, I simply sat there with my hands resting on the steering wheel, allowing the calm feeling inside me to settle more firmly into place. I had attended many family gatherings in that same backyard over the years. I remembered Lucas's first birthday when the decorations were simple and Daniel nervously tried to light a single candle while everyone laughed. I remembered summer barbecues where neighbors filled the yard and music played long after sunset. Those memories were real and meaningful, and nothing that had happened today could erase them. Yet as I sat there in the driver's seat, I understood something important about those memories. They belonged to a time when my presence in this family had been natural and unquestioned. Over the past several years, that certainty had slowly disappeared without my fully noticing it. The missing chair had only revealed what had already been happening quietly for a long time. I started the engine and let the car idle for a moment. Through the windshield, I could still see part of the backyard through the open gate. Lucas ran across the grass again with 2 other children chasing him, the cardboard birthday crown still slightly crooked on his head. His laughter carried faintly through the air and made me smile despite everything else that had happened. My love for that little boy had never been tied to chairs at a table or invitations to a party. It was something deeper and steadier than that. But love does not require a person to remain in places where they are clearly not welcome. That thought arrived quietly in my mind, not as anger or bitterness, but as a simple truth. For years I had believed that staying close to my family meant accepting every small discomfort that came with it. I had convinced myself that patience was the same as strength. Yet true strength sometimes means stepping away with dignity instead of remaining where respect has quietly disappeared. I shifted the car into reverse and slowly backed out of the driveway. As I drove down the street, the sounds of the party faded completely, replaced by the familiar quiet of the neighborhood. Trees lined both sides of the road, their leaves moving gently in the late afternoon breeze. The sky had begun turning a softer shade of gold as the sun moved lower toward the horizon. During the drive home, I thought about the many years I had spent supporting Daniel and his family in ways that often went unnoticed. Helping with rent when their first apartment became too expensive, covering childcare costs when Lucas was still a baby, quietly transferring money to Daniel's account when unexpected expenses appeared. I had never mentioned those things during arguments or disagreements because I believed that love within a family should not feel like a transaction. But as the car moved steadily along the familiar road toward my house, another realization began to form in my mind. Kindness should never require someone to erase themselves completely. And sometimes the most powerful response to being treated like an afterthought is not a loud confrontation, but a calm decision to stop pretending that nothing has changed. I arrived home just as the sun dipped low behind the trees lining my street, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. The house greeted me with the same calm stillness it always had, a kind of peaceful silence that only comes from living alone for many years. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and placed my car keys beside it, then walked slowly toward the living room where the large window overlooked the backyard garden I had planted with my late husband more than 20 years ago. The roses were beginning to bloom again, their soft red petals catching the last golden light of the evening. I stood there for a while, simply watching the garden and letting the events of the afternoon settle into memory. The calm feeling that had started at the party had not faded. In fact, it seemed to grow stronger the longer I thought about everything. Eventually, I walked to the small desk in the corner of the room where I kept a folder of household documents. Inside that folder were records that Daniel had probably forgotten about years ago. Bank statements, property paperwork, and several signed agreements I had quietly arranged when Lucas was still a toddler. Back then, Daniel and Emily had been struggling financially, juggling work schedules and daycare costs while trying to keep up with their mortgage payments. I had offered to help, the way many parents do when they want to make life easier for their children. What Daniel had never fully understood was how that help had been organized. The financial support I provided had not been random gifts. It had been structured carefully through a trust that I controlled, one that helped cover part of their mortgage payments and contributed to Lucas' future education fund. I had set it up that way so the money would always benefit Lucas directly while also giving Daniel and Emily some breathing room during those early years. For a long time, I never felt the need to mention those details. Helping family should not come with reminders or conditions. Yet as I opened the folder and looked down at the paperwork that evening, I realized something important. The arrangement only worked because I had continued to authorize those monthly transfers. Without that approval, the assistance simply stopped. I pulled out one of the statements and read the numbers quietly. Every month the same amount had been transferred to support their mortgage and another amount deposited into Lucas' education fund. The payments had continued for years without interruption. I had never once considered ending them because I believed we were building something stable for the future. But the memory of the table with 7 chairs returned clearly to my mind. 7 seats, 7 names, a small empty space where an 8th chair had never been placed. I closed the folder slowly and rested my hands on the desk. There was no anger in the decision forming in my mind, only the same calm clarity I had felt since leaving the party. Respect within a family cannot be forced through arguments or explanations. It can only exist when people value one another honestly. And when that respect quietly disappears, continuing to pretend everything is unchanged helps no one. I turned on the small lamp beside the desk and reached for the phone. The trust manager's number was already written on a card inside the folder. Tomorrow morning, I would make a simple call to review the account arrangements. Nothing dramatic. No confrontation. Just a quiet adjustment to reflect the reality I had finally allowed myself to see. Outside the window, the evening sky faded into deeper shades of blue while the first porch lights flickered on across the neighborhood. Somewhere down the street a dog barked, and then everything became still again. For the first time in many years, I felt certain about the direction my life was taking. Not because something had been lost that afternoon, but because I had finally stopped ignoring the truth that had been waiting in front of me all along. The next morning arrived with a quiet gray sky and the steady sound of rain tapping gently against the kitchen windows. I woke earlier than usual, not because I had slept poorly, but because my mind felt unusually clear. The events from the birthday party were no longer swirling through my thoughts the way painful memories often do. Instead, they sat calmly in my mind like a photograph placed neatly on a table, something I could observe without confusion. I brewed a cup of coffee and carried it to the small desk near the living room window where the folder from the night before still rested beneath the lamp. The garden outside looked softer in the rain, the rose petals bending slightly under the weight of tiny droplets. For years that garden had been a place where I thought about family decisions and future plans, and this morning felt no different except for one important detail. I was no longer trying to convince myself that everything would naturally improve if I simply waited long enough. I opened the folder again and reviewed the documents carefully. The trust account had been created almost 7 years earlier with the simple intention of helping Daniel's young family build stability. The monthly transfers had covered a portion of their mortgage payments and quietly contributed to Lucas's education savings at the same time. It had been my way of supporting them without making them feel dependent. I had believed that arrangement would continue for many years, possibly until Lucas finished college. But as I studied the paperwork that morning, I understood that the structure of the trust also gave me the ability to make adjustments whenever circumstances changed. That flexibility had always been part of the design. I finished my coffee and reached for the phone, dialing the number written on the small card inside the folder. After a few rings, a calm, professional voice answered. "Good morning. This is Michael Harris with Evergreen Trust Management. How may I assist you today?" I introduced myself and explained that I wanted to review the transfer schedule connected to the Collins Family Trust. There was no tension in my voice, only the steady tone of someone discussing ordinary financial matters. Michael pulled up the account records and confirmed the details I already knew. Garden. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, and a small puddle had begun forming near the stone path my husband had built long ago. Life continues to move forward whether we are ready for it or not. "Yes," I said calmly. "I would like to suspend the mortgage transfers beginning next month. The education fund for Lucas should remain active, but I would like it held exclusively within the trust until he reaches adulthood." Michael acknowledged the request and began noting the adjustments. The entire conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. There were no raised voices, no arguments, and no emotional explanations. When the call ended, I placed the phone back on the desk and closed the folder with a quiet sense of finality. The decision had not been made out of anger. It had been made out of clarity. Support offered with love should never be treated as something invisible, and respect within a family cannot exist where someone is quietly erased from the table. As the rain slowly began to lighten outside the window, I realized that the calm feeling inside me had not disappeared overnight. If anything, it had grown stronger. Yesterday, I had walked away from a table with 7 chairs. Today, I had simply rearranged a different table where my own decisions finally had a place again. 3 days passed quietly after the call with the trust manager, and life continued with its usual rhythm. The rain had cleared, and the sky had returned to the calm blue of early summer. That Wednesday afternoon, I was watering the roses in the garden when my phone began to ring inside the house. I dried my hands on a small towel and walked into the kitchen where the phone rested on the counter. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I simply looked at it, remembering how often I had waited for calls like this in the past. I answered calmly. "Hello, Daniel." There was a short pause before he spoke, and I could hear the tension in his voice immediately. "Mom, did something happen with the trust account? The bank said the mortgage transfer will not go through next month." I stepped toward the window while listening to him, watching the sunlight move gently across the backyard grass. "Nothing unexpected has happened," I said quietly. I reviewed the arrangement and made a few adjustments. Daniel exhaled slowly on the other end of the line. "But that payment has always been there," he replied. "We were counting on it for the house." I remained silent for a moment before answering, choosing my words carefully the same way I had done during the call with the trust manager. "The education fund for Lucas is still secure," I said. "That has never changed, and it never will. But the mortgage assistance was always temporary support." Daniel did not respond right away. I could almost picture him standing in the kitchen of his own house with the phone pressed against his ear, trying to understand something he had never needed to think about before. Finally, he spoke again, more quietly this time. "Emily said maybe there was a mistake." I looked out toward the garden where the roses moved gently in the afternoon breeze. The image of the table with 7 chairs returned to my mind with the same calm clarity it had held since the party. "There was no mistake, Daniel," I replied gently. "Financial help is meant to support a family when it is needed, not to continue forever without appreciation." Another silence followed. It was not angry silence, just the sound of someone beginning to understand something uncomfortable. After a moment, Daniel spoke again, his voice softer than before. "Mom, about the birthday party. I should have said something." I knew what he meant without him needing to explain the rest. The missing chair had been obvious to both of us. I leaned lightly against the kitchen counter and allowed a small breath to leave my chest. Sometimes people do not notice the importance of small moments until they are already behind us, I said. What matters is what we choose to do after we recognize them. Daniel did not argue. Instead, he asked quietly if Lucas could still visit next weekend to build the train set together. That request made me smile despite everything that had happened. Of course he can, I answered. That plan has not changed. When the call ended, I set the phone back on the counter and returned outside to the garden. The sunlight felt warm on my shoulders as I watered the last row of roses. Families are not defined by who sits at a table during a single afternoon celebration. They are defined by the respect people show one another over time. And as I stood there watching the water soak into the soil, I realized something simple but powerful. I had not removed myself from my family. I had only reminded them that if a seat disappears from the table, the one who notices it still has the right to choose where they will sit next. This emotional story explores how a grandmother quietly realizes her place in her own family has changed during a birthday celebration for her grandson. When she arrives and discovers there is no chair prepared for her at the table, the moment reveals years of subtle distance created by her daughter-in-law and silently accepted by her son. What begins as an uncomfortable afternoon gradually becomes a powerful reflection on dignity, boundaries, and respect within families. As the grandmother calmly leaves the party and reflects on the past, she remembers the many ways she supported her son's household over the years, from helping with their home expenses to building a secure education fund for her grandson. The quiet discovery of a missing seat becomes the turning point that leads her to reevaluate the financial support she has given for years without recognition. This deeply relatable narrative belongs among the most powerful family stories because it reveals how small moments often uncover larger truths hidden within everyday relationships. Through patience, clarity, and quiet strength, the grandmother chooses to adjust the support she once provided, while still protecting her grandson's future. When her son later calls to question the sudden change, he finally begins to understand the consequences of ignoring respect within his own home. Stories like this resonate with audiences who appreciate meaningful family stories that highlight emotional intelligence and the importance of boundaries. This heartfelt narrative reminds viewers that kindness should never mean becoming invisible, and that dignity can sometimes speak louder than confrontation. Viewers who enjoy reflective storytelling will recognize why moments like these define the most memorable family stories, where a grandmother's calm decision reshapes the dynamics of her family without anger or drama. The story ultimately shows that respect is the foundation of every healthy relationship, and that true family stories often reveal how quiet strength can restore balance when someone is overlooked. For anyone searching for thoughtful family stories about mothers, sons, and daughters-in-law, this narrative offers a powerful reminder that even the smallest seat at the table can represent the deepest place in the heart. Character 1. Elderly white American grandmother about 68 years old. Front-facing portrait view. Natural aging face with gentle expression and silver hair styled neatly. Wearing modest light blue cardigan and simple blouse. Realistic photography style. No cartoon. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration. Character 2. White American woman about 35 years old. Front-facing portrait view. Confident expression with polished appearance and styled blonde hair. Wearing elegant casual dress suitable for suburban family party. Realistic photography style. No cartoon. No cartoon. No CGI. No illustration.